Hello, good day. A huge welcome to today's BLOXHUB debate and to the topic, No One Left Behind, how do we build infrastructure for a circular future we haven't yet imagined? And a huge welcome to my panelists that I will introduce, or they will actually introduce themselves more at length later. But Tom Casey, Head of Pavements, Construction Materials and Innovation Network with us from Ireland. Russell Saltmarsh, Project Design Director from Metroselskabet. Simon Kjær Hansen, Center for Public Policy, Copenhagen University. Gert Didriksen from Kjær, Director of Technology, the Danish Road Directorate. It is such a huge pleasure to have you all here today. I've been looking so much forward to it. In today's debate, we will try and move from the butter roads and the potholes to the circular transition. That is not an easy task, I might add. And as some of you who may have been with us before in our series of designing the irresistible circular society already know, when we address the circularity topics, we are also addressing both the technicalities, the materials, the arts, and the people behind it. And I can rest assured that with today's panelists, we are in very, very safe hands of addressing exactly those topics. And before I proceed to allowing my wonderful panelists to answer the first questions, I'd also like to say thank you to the people behind today's event. Stina and Kimberly from AUP, it has been such a pleasure coordinating and planning today's event with you guys. Thank you so very, very much. And then, of course, as you know, we have a group of wonderful people from Build, Aalborg University, 3XN, Linear Group, the Royal Danish Academy with us as well. But in this series, we want to address the questions, just how do we create the irresistible circular society? And in one of those aspects, and one of those questions to address in that is just what role our transport infrastructure, how the role it plays, the climate changes, how does that impact what we're already seeing, the trends and the vision for the future. My name is Pernilla Berg. I'm Science Manager at BLOXHUB in Copenhagen. For those of you who do not know BLOXHUB, we are a co-working community space with almost 1,000 people in here every day. We have organizations, research institutions, and companies that collaborate in creating the sustainable future. So, my wonderful guests, the first question that you were told to contemplate as you introduce yourselves is, what do our future transport networks look like? So, Tom, with us from afar, I think out of sheer politeness, it is only befitting that you should be able to answer that question first. And a huge welcome to you, Tom.
Thank you very much. I thought you were going to be first because I was probably the oldest participant. I suppose in terms of a future transport scenario within Ireland, we've only very recently, and it's only in the past 10 years, have completed our major interurban routes in terms of roads. The organisation that I work for is called Transport Infrastructure Ireland, and it looks after the national road network in Ireland, but it also looks after the recently constructed Dublin light rail system. And I suppose that's quite a balance that can demonstrate the needs that we have in Ireland. We need to be able to move people very quickly in our centres of dense population, but we also need to have a transportation system that services the community. And Pernilla actually mentioned in her introduction the term butter road, and we did have a conversation very recently about it. And you can actually Google it, but in the 1700s, in the west of Ireland, they had a very good produce in terms of their premium butter, and it was salted and was sent on markets throughout the world. But the nearest harbour was in Cork, and obviously it was horse and transport. It was the transportation system, horse and cart. It took a long time for the farmers to get their produce to the market, so they formed a co-op and they built roads especially to bring their produce to the market. So it shows that even when we look at the past, into the future, our roads are there for a social need and they're there to serve the benefits of the community.
So, Tom, thank you very much, and a huge welcome to you. So then we'll go clockwise, I think. Russell, welcome.
Thank you.
The future.
The future, what does it look like? I think if the last 2 years has taught us anything, it's taught us that we need flexibility in our transportation systems. We need a diverse forms and modes of transport. There is not one solution that suits everyone. And we need to ensure that those solutions that we have actually are good for everybody to use. As we said earlier, no one is left behind. So what does that really look like? I mean, I think we need to step back and look at the diverse nature of our populations and ensure that's reflected in the people that are designing our stations. So everybody only designs for the insights and the experience they have. So ensuring that we capture those insights and experience, ensuring that we design for maybe demographic shifts. Do we need more lifts or escalators at our train stations to deal with that? Or do we need to make more provisions for ensuring people can get access to services easier, maybe at stations, at interchange hubs and things like this? We need to ensure we have a resilient system, so if one thing breaks down, there are different routes and different ways to get access to things. I think the key is ensuring that we have this balance of modes, we have this balance of ways, and the flexibility so people can choose what is best suited for them.
We'll talk more about how to create that future then, and what does that actually require. But thank you very, very much. Gert, the future, what do you think it bodes for us?
A good question, but by your introduction of me, thank you very much. But just shortly, I'm from Danish Road Directorate. Well, per definition, company, we are doing private transportation, black roads, and we want to turn into somehow a green company. And that's what we're going to discuss today. But our company, Danish Road Directorate, only covers 5% of the road network in Denmark. But these 5% actually covers 50% of the total traffic load in Denmark. So our roads doesn't create CO2. Well, it's the cars who are driving on our roads. And somehow we are going to face that, and I think we are going to discuss that a little bit later. But of course, we are also facing and looking at how are we actually going to be able to set up our roads so we can cover bus traffic. It links to the train system and so on. So of course we're going to look at that. So I hope we can discuss it a little bit later.
Absolutely. Simon, a huge welcome.
Thank you.
The future.
Yes.
What do you see it entails for us?
Well, first of all, the future will be urban. And I think where we will need wheels, hopefully they will be 2 wheels and not 4 wheels. And the fact that the future will be urban in a way that's a given, the projections from the United Nations are saying that maybe 70% of the global population will live in cities as we get to 2050. But I think there's also a huge sustainability benefit to that. Because with more dense, compact urban living, we also reduce the need for transportation to begin with. And we reduce the need, very importantly, for the infrastructure that connects us to begin with. And while it might be true that the roads themselves are not producing CO2, I think a lot of CO2 went into actually making those roads. So we should never forget that the most sustainable infrastructure is the one we don't need, because we're living in very compact communities where we can get by without it. And when I talk about the 2 wheels, my hope for the future is that all that stuff we've done in the past 60, 70 years to make the car such a natural mode of transportation for so many people, all that infrastructure that's been built to make it easy to use your car, all the gas stations and the roads and the convenient traffic lights that are suited for cars, that we turn that on its head and do the same for bicycles. So we make it easy to use the bicycle, that we create, like we have highways for cars, we create highways for bicycles. That now with the electric bicycle we can actually cover much more distance on the bicycle. So my hope is 2 wheels and urban future.
That's an interesting future. I think we're in for a wonderful debate. And I just want to remind you that are participating virtually, you are more than welcome to ask questions in the chat function. I have my brilliant colleague ready to facilitate your questions and comments in the YouTube, and we'll make sure that I actually get them. And for those of you here with us in Copenhagen, you can literally do the old-fashioned way of raising your hand, and then we'll have your questions and comment incorporated. So just to make sure that this is a debate that's also for you. So we have had some different future scenarios now presented. And Tom, I've lived in Dublin for a few years, and I just have to say I hope that things are very different in Dublin, because when I lived there I was very afraid to sit on a bicycle, apart from when it was in a park. So I think Simon has raised a future scenario that will require something quite different in terms of infrastructure in Ireland for sure. But one of the things that you talked a lot about, we had in our previous conversation for today's debate, you raised that interesting axis of east-west, and what you also told the rest of us in preparation for today, that there had been an investment in the roads, of course, but also in the railways. And then the road network was able to cover the capacity and the need, and that has now changed with the density. So my question to you, do you see that the future that Simon just outlined for us, do you see a scenario for that emerging in Ireland as well?
Very much so, and like yourself, I have been a cyclist for a short while, just maybe the last 10 years, and I have noticed there's quite an increase, and at one stage I had to change my commute because the cycle lanes were at capacity, and it was more difficult to get through the cycle lanes than it was to take any other mode of transport. It is changing. We are obviously looking at active travel being an issue. But I think what you're saying in terms of the east and west, and what Simon said in terms of urbanisation, the example I gave about the Butter Road, one of the issues that, or one of the aspects, I suppose, that most people would know Ireland from, is that we are an agricultural society, and most societies will depend for their own food produce. We won't grow those in the cities. We need to have, and the term flexibility has been used, and also the term balance. So if the idea is to bring everybody along, not everyone will be suited to travelling by public transport, and certainly in Ireland we have a dispersed population, very much concentrated in the centre of the country on the east coast in Dublin, and you could say we have a number of radials or spokes that go out to the other parts of the country. So there is, I suppose, in terms of industry, heavy industry, and manufacturing industry, that's concentrated where the markets are, or where the access to the markets are, and that would be our major ports and our major airports. But we still need distribution. We still need to be able to bring food supplies, and people need to be able to get to and from, again, as they did in the 1700s, to get their goods to market quickly and safely. So I think that in the short term, I don't think we're going to see a huge change, but there is a realisation, and I certainly would have seen it over the last few years. The number of people that participate in active transport is significantly more. Another advantage you might have noticed from Dublin is that the higher ground tends to be in the west of Ireland. That's where the mountains are, and the rain-bearing clouds come in from the west. So by the time it gets to Dublin, we don't have that much rain. So we actually have a very moderate climate, a climate that is suited to active transport, and there is an investment within that. So I do see that we will have to change our systems to accommodate the types of transport. Again, in terms of key junctions, we will have to give priority, and I think we can learn from other countries. I believe in France and in the US, people are allowed on their bikes to cross on red lights, provided it's clear. We wouldn't have those rules and regulations at the moment. That's why we tend to get capacity issues. So I do think that there is going to be a change, but there's going to have to be a balance. And I said it's very unique in terms of my organisation that the centre and the largest centre of population being Dublin, and the quickest way we found of moving people around is the electric tram, which has been extended throughout the city, and that's part of my organisation. But the balance with that is that we also need to serve the rest of the country, the rest of the community. We can't, as the title of the debate is, we can't leave anybody behind. We should try and serve everyone equal and realise that it's not just one answer for everyone.
That notion of reallocation of space in terms of the different uses of the roads, do you not agree with that, Gert? I assume that this is
No.
the two wheels.
I would just I do think that Simon do have a nice vision. I live in Copenhagen in Valby, and I love my bike, and I love the metro. Not only because my wife is working there, but I love the metro system, and it has connected the city somehow, and it has actually turned the city into an international city somehow level. So of course you take your bike when you live in Copenhagen. But the roads, which I'm in charge of, well, we also have to connect the whole country, and there's quite a lot of transport of goods from Jutland to Zealand and the other way around. So if you look at the big roads, I do think that 95% of all goods transport is on four-wheel on the roads, and only between 2 or 5 are on the rail system. So somehow we need the roads, and I'm not sure that we will see that we'll turn our system into two-wheel system when you look at on the whole country, and. So somehow, of course, you can say, when I don't know what's the figures today, how many percent of the Danish population is in the big cities today. Can you say that?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how many it is, but in the larger Copenhagen region is what, 1.7 million, and we are around 6 million in Denmark. So, it might be more than 1/3.
So actually, there's quite a step to 70% that you mentioned in the start. So, and you can say that from a political perspective, our government has just decided an infrastructure plan to 2035. So we are a little bit in the future here, and that was also your starting point,
exactly.
where we're actually heading. And of course, somehow the people will move to big cities, and that's where the infrastructure in the city, in metro, in the light rail, and so on are focusing. But you also have to be sure that you actually are able to cover the needs. Right now, when we're talking about transport of goods, also transport of people from one place to another place. And but what I think is also a game changer. Today, after the corona here, post-corona, we are almost, we are not only at the same level of the transport jam in Denmark, we are 5% more than before corona. And that shows that it's very, very difficult to change people's habits from when now they have just gone into the car, it's easier. You don't have you're not going to be exposed to the risk for getting corona and so on. So to get the people back from the cars now to the public system, it's really a huge task. But I do think that we have to do something about that direction. But I do think that we have a situation now where we have to deal with the needs in the society, also the needs that our system will cover, and of course then we will somehow slightly turn our needs into something else.
Russell.
Yeah, just I think picking up maybe on Simon's vision of more and more people moving to the city, as I think is a trend globally, not only in Copenhagen. As the populations grow, we'll need to move more and more people around our cities. And of course, Copenhagen, one of the very efficient ways of doing that is by bicycle, but at the same time, not everybody can cycle, not everybody wants to cycle. Sometimes when it's raining, people tend to take other forms of transport. So I think one of the advantages with a good metro system, especially one that's underground, is that you don't take space up on the roads. So you can actually maybe reallocate that space on the roads to more cycle lanes, to maybe cafe areas outside coffee shops or park areas or places for children to play, etc. And we also need to find energy efficient ways of doing this as we transition our way over to more of an electrical economy. We're going to have to generate a huge amount more electricity. So ensuring that we have ways that are energy efficient ways of transporting large volumes of people around the city is key. And that's one of the, let's say, one of the benefits of a mass transit type system, which we need to focus on, I think, if we're going to achieve our overall goal of reducing the climate impact.
And I think some of the things that you have the four of you have now addressed is what we know from so many studies that we have as the density of people moving to the cities is a global phenomenon. But if I go back to the historical aspect of the EastWest in Ireland, which we also had in Denmark, surely there must be a paradox in terms of infrastructure. One thing is to secure as sustainable, as a green system in the cities as humanly possible, reallocate the roads to something else, etc., while still ensure cohesion within not just the country and the regions, but also internationally. And I don't know, Tom, just to bring you into the debate, but you will get back to the balance, because I think there's also another interesting element of balance. But just to ask, how do we tackle to not create divides, but actually ensure social cohesion between various parts of country as people move towards the cities, but still with a need for a well-knit infrastructure across regions, across countries, across continents. And I think, just to spare you the long details, but I entertained at our last science talks what it's like to go by rail through Europe, just to say there is a room for improvement, to quote one of my co-travelers. So Tom, just so we don't end up with yet another East-West paradox, is this something that you're also addressing in Ireland to make sure that both the city is improving and transitioning, but also the country per se?
I suppose there's a recognition that there are other forms of transport available, and to try and get the balance with those. Again, if we're looking to try and serve everybody, we need to understand their needs. So that obviously means that we need to have a lot of information of how people and why people use the different types of networks and what their needs actually are. So I think, again, Simon was saying that urbanisation, we would see the likes of, say, a lot of our major schools are in major urban areas, hospitals and the likes. So we'll have to be able to service those. I said that my organisation looks after the major interurban roads on the light rail in Dublin. The Minister is now asking us to look at active travel. And one of the issues that we did when we built the network, essentially it was easier to build a new network. And what we're now looking at is the old network. We're trying to make better use of that for active transport. So one of the first projects that we have is our road that brings us from Dublin on the east coast to Galway on the west coast. We have now a motorway between the two cities, and the old road we're looking at bringing in active travel. And what that also does is it brings an industry, which is the tourist industry. We've had some very successful enterprises in terms of tourism on the west of Ireland with active transport. Many people that might have heard of the Wild Atlantic Way, we call it, which is along the west coast, and that's our least densely populated part of Ireland. And we've actually regenerated parts of that urban and country area by bringing in a different form of tourism. And it's become hugely popular. So I think that in terms of getting a divide, we must, in the first instance, understand what the need is. So once we can determine what the need is, and perhaps as with the cycleways on the west of Ireland, they themselves then will bring a benefit, which would be beyond just simply the benefit for the local community. So I think that we definitely need information based on what the needs are, and to be able then to meet those needs efficiently and effectively.
That is a beautiful transition to the next kind of topic that I want to raise in this debate, namely, what does this kind of transition towards this future, what in the role of what does the transition, if we also want to go more green, as Gert has already addressed, what does the transition require? One of the things that I had great interest in hearing more about, Simon, you mentioned it diplomatically, that we need infrastructure, but constructing the infrastructure, we're talking large scale projects. They may not themselves be without, there's quite a large carbon footprint left behind. But there is actually work going into it. I know there is research going into actually changing that so there is less carbon involved in the construction. But there is also new design principles, there are new methods, new technology and materials. So just to dive into a little bit more, what does this actually require to transition, and in which way can the circular principles assist us in that transition? Gert, I know that you have a lot, you have so much experience in that, so I thought I'd let you start.
I will take the next 20 minutes then. No, well, one of my employees actually working here is a PhD student, and what are we doing in that study? Well, we are trying to create a new method for setting up concrete with a less footprint, and trying to use new materials into the concrete to be sure it can actually last at least the same time as concrete today, but hopefully also longer and with less footprint. Another thing we have done here recently, we have made a study on 2 bridges built in 2010, one element bridge and one cement in situ bridge. And we tried with our new developed tool, InfraLSA, and say, okay, what is actually the baseline when it was built in 2010? And then you can say from 10 to 20 there have been a development in new materials, new ways to do. So the first 20% in less footprint was actually, you can say, free of charge. So that was the starting point. But but if we say that we are going to somehow deliver in every regard to the legislation with 70% in the baseline 1990, then there's still a long way to go. So we try to say, okay, if we're going to design this a new way, what could we actually, with design optimization, let's say new type of concrete, another design of the bridge, how much could we then reduce the CO2 footprint? And it turned out that actually we could take off 30% more. And then if you look at the materials you're using, then how much more could you then take off? So between 15 and 20. So actually, when we look at design and material selection, you can reduce the bridge which was built in 2010 with almost 50%. So that is one way to do it.
That new focus on actually using less and providing the same safety and quality, etc. What has brought about that change of focus?
That focus will be turned into our standards.
Yeah.
In Denmark, we are working with called vejregler. It's a kind of a Danish standard system, and what we are doing, and when we use directly in our tendering processes and so on. So it will go into these standards. So it will be, you can say this kind of development or innovation very close to the market, and you can use it directly into our standards.
So research actually plays, that kind of production of new knowledge plays a huge role in this circular transition.
Of course it will. Of course it will. But I also have told you before that we're not going into fundamental research. We're doing applied research. And it's very much focused on the technical or the readiness level of what we're doing. So what Maxime is doing here about concrete, I hope that he can go directly into our processes and directly into our tendering procedures. So now you know what I expect from you.
No pressure, no pressure. So that's one concrete example of circularity that can actually assist in the transition of construction.
Well, it's a
Russell,
very specific
It's
one.
a very specific example. Russell, is there a copy-paste or do you need to actually contextualize it just a bit more when you're dealing with the metro?
Yeah, I mean, when a couple of years ago we started looking at possible new metro lines in Copenhagen, and we did an assessment of, from an operational point of view, we have quite a low carbon footprint compared to some of the other forms of transport, but we acknowledge the fact that when you build this infrastructure, we use a lot of concrete and steel. So we really wanted to put a focus on how can we improve that, how can we make that better. You have to consider what can you implement in the different phases of the project. So when you're starting very early, look conceptually, look at what can we reduce, what do we have a direct influence on as a client organization, how can we reduce the amount of materials used. So examples, look at where we've got underground stations, can we make them shallower? Think the Kongens Nytorv station on M3. So we're not going as deep, we don't have as much concrete being used. Can we even launch the TBMs from surface and get rid of the ramps, for example? Is there a way to remove structures that are maybe not needed? Also looking conceptually at alternative materials. We've looked at options for maybe even a timber station where we're looking at elevated structures. So can we replace that concrete and steel with alternatives? It's also, though, looking at let's say the indirect influence that we can have, especially as large clients like Via Directorate and Metro Sysselskabet and others. Can we nudge the industry or push the industry to be ambitious in reducing the embodied carbon in concrete and steel? Doing that maybe by looking at the way we procure works, the way we set contract requirements and things like that. So it's looking at all areas of the project, seeing where we can have either big gains some places or even marginal gains elsewhere, and collectively we can get an overall reduction of the climate impact of the infrastructure when we build it.
I'll get back to a little bit in terms of the innovation and safety, because there are some similarities between the health sector and infrastructure in terms of the need for innovation, and at the same time also there is a need for safety. But Simon, Russell talks about basically, and I know this from Gert as well, that there's you can as a company source materials and ask your suppliers to behave responsibly, etc. But if we talk about procurement, and we know the public sector is actually quite a good customer when it comes to infrastructure, etc., what is the role of policymakers and governments, and how can that play a role in this transition? What is your perspective on that?
Well, I think there is a huge role for politicians to play here. Obviously, I would say, but really, it's also a quite specific one, because I think by setting a very clear example and setting very high standards, for example, let's imagine the lawmakers here in Denmark said, okay, 2 years from now we will not construct any new larger infrastructure projects without having reduced the embedded carbon by 30%. That would send a very strong, and this is a thought experiment, right? I'm not sure if that's possible, but that would send a very strong signal to the market that if you want to come and help us build this infrastructure that we are commissioning, you better find ways to do it the way we want it. And it might sound a bit abstract or theoretical, but I think the big cities in the world have actually shown on a number of occasions that's setting a very high standard, a very high level of ambition can in very quickly shift the markets. And I experienced that when I worked with C40, this big organizations of mega cities around the world. And it's actually not that long ago that the big manufacturers of buses were saying that the market is not really ready for electric buses. So when a city like London or Buenos Aires, when they were looking at changing their old diesel-driven buses to something new and preferably electric, some of the very big players in the market were saying, it's not really mature, we can't really do that at this moment. But then when a number of cities went together and said, okay, but here's the deal, from 2025, we'll only procure electric buses, full stop. It took a year or two, and then all the big market players were ready to deliver the electric buses because they had a certainty that there'll be demand. And maybe more than that, they also had a fear that if they couldn't deliver, there might be huge markets in the big cities around the world that they'd miss out on. So I think it's essential that politicians make those bold, you could say moonshot visions, well, 5 years from now, this is the only thing we'll procure. Because that, at the end of the day, is where you really take note if you're producing, for example, the concrete that's being used by the state and the state roads. So I think that's definitely a very efficient way to move forward.
And I also remember, Tom, that you've mentioned previously that transition is actually also what you're witnessing in Ireland. And I know from some of the work that Simon has done in C40 that this is what we can, just as you say, we've seen globally. So there is a role. So when you actually source your materials as responsibly as possible, you're not alone, or potentially not alone. Going back to the innovation, because when we talk about the transition to circularity, one of the design principles when we talk about circularity is design for disassembly. And I assume that is not quite easily done when we are talking about these large-scale infrastructure projects. So apart from materials, you also have, Tom, and also please just interrupt us if, because you Gert and you, Tom, you've mentioned this aspect of balance. And I also know that Russell, on numerous occasions, you talk about the interface. So design for disassembly.
Maybe just if I could interject
Tom.
For a moment, and I fully support the idea that we need to look at our materials, and we are, just like Gert, on a phase where we're doing quite a lot of research where we understand our materials better. But again, just to get the balance perspective in, one of the areas that we're concentrating on at the moment on our circular economy plan is making sure that we look at a life cycle analysis. So it's not just simply what it costs to produce the material. And again, Simon was saying large infrastructure takes up quite a lot of carbon. But it's there for a purpose, and it has to be used, and it can create a benefit. So if we take the example of our light rail system in Dublin, it took a lot of carbon to produce it, but the benefit doesn't actually come from I suppose, the actual infrastructure itself. it comes from the people using it. So they're switching. So we need to have a better system in terms of how we score our carbon assessment. So we might have to put a lot of carbon into the construction, but the benefit that we can get out of it then over its life cycle, over its use. And again, one of the aspects that we looked at when we were developing our circular economy plan for our materials, it wasn't just simply looking at the materials at end of life. It was actually looking at the whole life cycle. So what we took upon ourselves in developing the plan was to look at a materials management perspective. So we looked at the very start of the process. What was the need? How could we service that need? What flexibilities do we need to put in? And we actually needed to change the system that we had for designing our pavements, because the system we had for designing our pavements was based on an empirical approach. And it was more or less, let's see what the minimum we need to get the materials in. Now what we're actually saying is, let's actually see the benefit that we get from that material, not just in terms of the construction, but in terms of the maintenance phase and in terms of its end of life. So people had mentioned, environmental product declaration, which is the amount of carbon, but there are behind that there are a system of product category rules. So there are effectively 4 stages in terms of an EPD. It's the construction, it's the construction of the actual material itself. It's the placement in the asset, be it a road or a rail. It's the operational phase, and then it's the end of life phase. So we need to look at it holistically over its entire life cycle, and not just simply in terms of what it takes to produce it on the day of construction.
And going back to Gert and Russell's points in terms of research and innovation, is there a further need? Do we have all the tools? Do we have the methods? Are we where we want to be in order to make that complete life cycle analysis and the right decisions?
Yeah, we are.
We are.
We are.
I mean,
We're good.
Well, you have
That's
to
the best news of the day.
you have to learn to crawl before you can
Yeah.
go and run,
Yeah.
But actually, we have here in Denmark developed Infra LCA. It's a life cycle assessment system on infrastructure, and Metroselskabet is a part of that, and Banet Denmark is a part of that. And it's very important that there is an agreement in the industry how to measure, how to calculate, and how to set up a baseline because if you can't set up a baseline and agree on a baseline, then you can't discuss what is actually going to be achieved and so on. So and then when you're going to set up a process where you go into a tendering process and say, okay, what is actually the result of this infrastructure project? Are you above or are you below, or what are you? Are you going to have a fee or a decline or whatever are going to be? So it's very important that you have a system where you agree on how to measure, and we have that system today.
Nationally or internationally?
No, that's national system, but you can say that we also have a cooperation on a European level where all the national infrastructure and national road authorities are cooperating. And we have right now set up a task force in this system to work with decarbonization. Ireland is also a part of that. And I do think that one of the focus areas in this work will be how to calculate, how to set up a system to calculate it right. So it's not going to be a same standard probably, but it's going to be a standard used by the big national road authorities.
Russell?
I think I'd just like to touch on one of the really big challenges that we have that you mentioned earlier about deconstructing or decommissioning large infrastructure. I mean, it is not easy. There's no simple answer. I think one of the areas that we really want to look at is we design our infrastructure for 100 years normally. So instead of saying, okay, we're going to decommission it at that 100-year life cycle, how can we actively extend that life period, that the design life for that structure? I think actually Sun and Belt have recently gone through a process for Storbelt Bridge where they've actually extended the life of their structure by an additional 100 years, so doubling the life. But how can we do it? How can we do it cleverer nowadays? Can we embed sensors in the structures to continuously monitor the condition? Can we also apply this approach to, let's say, not only the structures and the infrastructure, but also the mechanical and electrical works, using predictive maintenance, so we are repairing and renewing things when they need to be renewed and not just on a regular basis. So we reduce the amount of materials that are used and also reduce the disruption to our passengers and ensure that we can provide a service more regularly, for example. So I think that's a real key that we need to look at.
And would you agree with Gert that we have the tools and methods and the knowledge that we need to do this?
I think we've definitely come a long way, but as with anything, when this is a new process that we're learning, and we will always become cleverer as we go through this process, as we apply it to projects, and we will see how we can improve processes, how we can improve tools, how we can think differently.
And how do you do that in a project that's already on its way? So how do you maintain that level of experimentation and innovation in something as fundamentally something that we will rely very, very heavily on in terms of safety as in a metro system?
Yeah, I mean, it's like all of our projects standing up here, they last for 10 years plus when they first start on the design, and technology can progress a huge distance in that time. So finding ways to encourage innovation throughout the life cycle of the project, either contractually or some other mechanisms, ensuring flexibility maybe in your contract requirements to enable new processes, new methodologies and materials to be used, etc. And these are the things that we need to find out how we can do that and how we can make room for that. I don't have the answers now, but it's definitely something we're looking at, how we can achieve that.
Just to add something, because you can say that big infrastructure owners can influence the market, of course. And what we do is actually we have a close cooperation, Metroselskabet in Denmark, municipality of Copenhagen, in this context of setting up a system like InfoLC. And if we're going to use this system, this will depend on these environmental products declaration, EPD or Miljøvaredeklarationer. And that has actually been set up in our procurement right now on Vestfyn, on the system there. And I do think I made a press release yesterday about it. And so we are setting up a system where you can say these EPDs, we need that to make sure that the calculation in this system are right. And the EPDs you can take on different levels. You can take a branch or a product or a specific project EPD. And what we have asked Emil Eriksen, who are actually the contractor on Fyn, to deliver product EPDs here in this project, so we can set up a baseline and actually learn how to do this, because this is also a learning process, how to tender, how to procure the right way, how are we actually going to set the demands and how to follow it.
And do we have the language to ensure the right specifications in the procurement? Because I'm not an engineer, my background is not as an engineer, and some of the expressions and the words that you're using, the technical terms, I also kind of stand here thinking, it requires an engineer around the table.
Yes, but also a lawyer somehow.
Also a lawyer. So my question, of course, is, do you think that we may have the knowledge? I would say accessibility and transparency of all that knowledge would be nice. Feel free to ask questions or comment in the audience if you think
it might it might actually be better to say that we have a better understanding, because I think one of my colleagues has an expression that every day is a school day. So there are new systems, new ways of looking at things, and just as an example, and you asked about innovation, one of the key areas of innovation is collaboration, and certainly in my organisation, we've done a lot of collaboration with our third level institutes, and maybe look beyond areas where we would normally look. So one aspect from my own perspective is I met some colleagues in UCC in Cork, and they're geologists, and they had a piece of equipment where they could look very, very closely at our basic building material, which is rock aggregate. And we could look right into the microscopic area of it. So we could actually understand better, not just why it worked the way it did, but how it worked the way it did, and how we could actually change that, and how we could classify those which were more beneficial than others. And a lot of that comes to having systems whereby we can store large amount of information and be able to interrogate that information. I mentioned that we moved from an empirical design basis. Empirical is where we look at what's happened in the past to predict what's going to happen in the future. And that's in some ways when we're looking at very long life, as we're talking about life cycles of 100 years. Well, how do we actually predict that? We couldn't even predict what happened in the last few years. So there are going to be events that are there. And that's, I think we started off saying that we needed flexibility. But we also need, as Gert said, systems that help us to manage and understand and monitor that, so that if we do move to lean construction, that we have our, as we term, our asset management systems, where we actually measure how they're performing on a regular basis. And once we can see that there's any change in that, we can intervene, and intervene in earlier means to say that we're using less resources. Yeah. So I wouldn't exactly say that we've arrived, but we are in a much better position than we had been, because we have better access to data, we've better analytical systems to do that. We have quite a lot of history behind it to see what can be done, and we have the computing power and the information systems to be able to project that forward. So I think we are in a much, much better position now to offer lean construction. But even at my stage, I still learn every day.
Excellent. And we actually, that sparked a question from the audience, and thank you very, very much. Please.
Yes, a few years ago when I was investigating green energy technology, I encountered this company that was producing kinetic road blocks, which when you drive on, your car is getting charged. So I thought, this is awesome. You're driving and you're charging. You don't have to stop anywhere to charge. And these blocks, they can be replaced if there's something wrong with them in the future after a while. And I thought this would be a great idea for the future. Are any of you thinking in these directions, or?
It's a very good question. Yeah.
Actually, many years ago, I started a project with induction. When you drive when from the sideway, from the highway, you are speeding down, and at the same time you can make some kind of induction and charge up your road right away, your car right away. Well, this is an idea that is on the fundamental research basis, I would say. So I will turn that into the universities. So I will look at Simon and say, well, that's something for you.
But tapping into what you were saying, Tom, and thank you very much. Do you want to have a follow-up question, or we have another question? Yeah. Excellent. Well, let's move it on.
So, thanks. I think I have a question that's a bit linked to that. Yeah. I was thinking about how we're designing infrastructure, in particular now our roads or metros, for 100 years, based on how we understand them to operate now. Yeah. Obviously, technology evolves. We might come up with ideas like this. So,
it's a good idea.
It's a very good idea, exactly. Yeah. So, should we be trying to design our big infrastructure, our roads, our rail, to allow for more adaptability in the future? Because we tend to be designing them for how we're using them today or in the very near future.
It's a very good question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it comes back to a point that we've mentioned a lot here about balance. So how much do you try and design for flexibility and alternative use later that may increase, let's say, for the size of the stations? If it increases the volume, the footprint, we then need to pour more concrete, more embodied CO2, etc. So it's how do you design for that adaptability and that flexibility without knowing what it is, whilst at the same time trying to reduce your embodied CO2 and reduce the amount of resources you need to use. So finding that balance is one of the challenges we all fight with every day. I think everybody probably sitting in this room has those sorts of challenges. I don't know what the answer is for you. It's something that needs to be considered as we go forward.
But I think there's another important perspective here, because it's definitely a huge step forward that we now are able to make better assessments of the impact in terms of emissions, carbon emissions of the infrastructure we're developing. I'm very encouraged to hear that we have the data, we have the systems, things are moving in the right direction. But to me then, what we need is the science-based target for the fair share, you could say, of emission reductions that must come from this sector. Because, take Denmark as an example. We have 10 years to reduce our carbon emissions by 70%. So I'd like to ask some of my fellow panelists, what's your contribution to that? Do you have that analysis? Do you know how much you have to reduce the impact, for instance, of new investments in order to meet that? Do you have an analysis of what to do with the cars that are still running on the roads that you're building and so on? So, what's your contribution to meeting those total targets? I think that's a key question in the climate crisis. And it makes me a little worried if we spend too much time on the research where maybe 10 years from now we'll know how to get more balance and flexibility in a new infrastructure, when we have a here and now task of reducing emissions day by day.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm sorry to disappoint you, so I don't have a specific percentage to give you at this moment in time. I think one thing I can say is that we are looking at how we can reduce that. So the examples I gave earlier by shallower stations and looking at other innovations to see, are they technically feasible? So we sat down and said, look, nothing's off the table. What are your ideas to reduce the embodied CO2 in our stations? And then we would evaluate them from a technical point of view. What is the actual benefit when evaluating using an assessment tool in terms of reduction of CO2? But also, what is the impact on what somebody might call the more traditional project indicators? On does it increase or decrease the cost? What about time of construction? Is it going to increase the time and disrupt the neighbourhoods and influence or disturb the neighbours more? Or how does it affect the risk profile? Does it increase or decrease the risk profile, etc.? So we need to review all of these different ideas that we have, and see which ones can we implement? How can they be implemented in the project? How can we encourage contractors to use more sustainable methods and materials, etc.? And it's not an easy question to answer. We need to go through a process, and that's what we're currently doing at the moment.
And I would say that's one challenge. The other challenge is also, which is one of the things that in focusing on the climate change, how to actually ensure that the infrastructure is ready to encompass what will come in terms of the climate change. So we have some huge challenges ahead of us, for sure. Just one thing in the title, we have a beautiful title of today's debate, namely No One Left Behind. And we have spent a lot of time now debating materials and construction processes, and that we have a better understanding, which is very, very nice. But just to now adding to what you were saying, Simon, in terms of, okay, so what's the contribution? But one of the things, the infrastructure is also with the aim and the objective of leaving no one behind. And that also comes with the current change in climate as we see it. So just to start focusing a little bit on the collaboration. I know it's a long lead into what I want to ask you. But we have new knowledge, we have data, we have analysis. But as Tom said, this actually requires collaborating with new fields of knowledge to get the understanding that we need. Simon, from your perspective in terms of city planning, would you say that we have a much better understanding of how to collaborate? Do you think we are there where we're able to do exactly what you were asking Gert and Russell, our contribution to meeting the targets? Do we have what it takes?
Well, I think we have I don't know if we have a much better one than previously or if it's good enough, but I would say there is a good understanding of the collaborations needed to deliver real carbon emission reductions. And I think one of the reasons is because the big cities of the world that are in the C40 network, following the Paris Agreement in 2015, they made an analysis where they measured their collective carbon budget. So the number of gigatons of CO2 emissions they could put into the atmosphere before they had reached their fair share.
Yeah.
And based on that analysis, they then took a collective decision amongst the big cities. We have to develop plans and strategies that are very robust, science-based, that sector by sector will identify what are then the reductions we need in order to deliver our 25 targets, our 30 targets, and ultimately our 2050 targets. Those plans are not perfect. They're still, they're under constant development and improvement. But it's a good starting point to have that analysis. Okay, what's the task we have ahead of us if we are to deliver something that you could say, based on our carbon budget, is our fair share? Another thing I think that's actually encouraging now that we're leading up to, well, it's very soon beginning in Glasgow, the COP26 negotiations. I think another thing that's very encouraging is that there is a real collaboration now, I think, between states, businesses, cities. There seems to be a real understanding that the only way to deliver those radical transformations that are needed in order to create a climate-safe future is really by everyone supporting each other in getting real reductions to happen. So I think, talking about collaboration, I think there is actually a positive message there, which is where in the beginning it seemed that the whole climate negotiation space was very much amongst states, and sometimes it led to frustrations. Now it seems to be a broader group. There's a real, you could say, global coalition building. And maybe I forgot to mention the most important aspect of that coalition, that we see a real pressure from school children, from NGOs, from all sorts of organizations, but a pressure that's very productive and positive in the sense that it's not standing outside the tent and just pointing fingers. It's really encouraging those who are in power and have formal power to get something done and to do it in collaboration. So I actually think there are some good and positive signs there.
Maybe just to respond
Please.
to your question in terms of what we can do in construction and the maintenance of our roads. I think we need to maybe look at a slightly different perspective. If we're talking about carbon neutral, it doesn't necessarily mean that the construction itself is going to be a nil user of carbon, but we need to get a balance. So we might, if we expand carbon in one area, we need to look at some other area where we can reduce it. And I know my colleagues in the UK are one of the projects that I believe they're working on at the moment is actually, from a road perspective, planting more trees. So it's an understanding of the carbon effect that we have in terms of construction it, and then maybe looking at other ways that we can contribute to balance that in the short term. We certainly, if you use the old expression, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. We can't actually build infrastructure without having to consume some form of energy. And that's obviously going to consume some carbon. What we need to try and do is look and see how we can minimize that. And that's one of the perspectives that we're doing, minimize it in terms of the design of the infrastructure. It's one of the areas we're looking at in terms of what we term business process re-engineering of how we design our roads, where we are looking at the whole effect of carbon over its life cycle. But there will be a need to build the infrastructure, to manage and maintain the infrastructure and that means it's going to use carbon. So then we'll have to look and see, well, what ways can we collaborate with people, maybe outside our industry, such as maybe our colleagues have been looking at elsewhere, in terms of encouraging reforestation on the lakes. It might not be the answer, but as long as we are aware of what our contribution is in terms of using the carbon, then we can get a balance in terms of how we negate that effect.
Any questions? This is the time to ask and comment. Feel free, please. I'm looking no.
I think whilst we're waiting for questions, just on the collaboration issue, I mean, I think it's absolutely key for us actually making any real significant reduction in what we do. At the end of the day, there are very few real true innovations out there. Lots of people are doing lots of different things all over the world. We need to learn from each other. We need to share knowledge. That's why we work closely with other client organizations like Via Directorate. We go out and have a market dialogue with possible suppliers to see how they're working with their sustainability, what is achievable, what's realistic, like can we have electric plants on our work sites in 5 years' time? Is the market going to be ready for that? Do we need a similar situation like the buses that Simon was talking about? Can we push the industry? Talking to them to show them where we want to be. Can they deliver? And it's been really encouraging speaking to all of those suppliers. They say, look, set us ambitious targets and we'll meet them. And they're on their own journey. And it seems like everybody from consultants to contractors to other client organizations are all pushing in the same direction, which is at least encouraging for me and hopefully for everybody involved.
And out of curiosity, do you think that is because of the increased awareness, as Simon was saying, you know, we need everyone to be able to answer, this is our contribution? Is it that shift in understanding that there is something so pivotal at stake?
Well, you know, when the government decided legislation saying we have to reduce 70%, then you are aware that something has to happen.
Yes.
Well, we haven't got a specific target yet. Danish Road Directorate don't know what is actually our 1990 baseline. Very difficult. So we say, okay, perhaps we're going to make a baseline for today and then see what we can do. But we are very inspired and do take our responsibility here very seriously. And I do think that we could talk much more about what action we actually are doing about recycling, carbon-free construction sites and so on. So that is already been doing and going on. So
I know that you're using nature-based solutions for sound protection along the road. So I know that there are lots of things.
So we are doing a lot of things, but I can't give you a figure, Simon. Well, we are going to reduce this amount because that wouldn't be serious. But of course, you can say that the political level could say you are going to deliver this target, and what and how you're going to do it. Well, that's your problem. That's a way to do it.
So there is a collective understanding, not also apart from the political vision and the ambitions, but there's also an emerging collective understanding.
Yeah, I think what's also important, as well as those things you just mentioned, is that we're seeing the people involved in these projects have much more of a focus on sustainability nowadays, especially the younger people coming in, graduating from university. That's one of their biggest focus. It's not about how do I design a bridge or how do I design a tunnel, it's how do I do it sustainably. And so it's great because that's pushing everybody to do things better. And we just need to enable them. Sorry.
A short comment on that about new people and new educated people. We are in a situation where we have infrastructure plan where we are going to use a lot of money in the next coming years, and at the same time we are going to get around 100 new employees into our organization, and that will be focused on new people from university and so on. So we get the newest knowledge in our system, and that will boost the innovation in the different.
And do you experience as Russell that these young people actually come? You said it as well. The school children that they also come with that mission-driven
they will.
passion. They
They
want
will.
to
They
create sustainably,
Yeah.
build, construct, create
Yeah.
sustainable solutions.
I'm quite sure about that.
Yeah. There is hope for the future. We have a comment, question. Lovely.
Hi, my name is Ulla Eikert, and I'm here as a private person. But during the
You
days
have to put it up too.
I work at Bain Denmark, and I agree with you, Gert, that we have a lot of our tools at hand. We have Infraelse and EPDs and a lot of stuff. So I think that's very satisfying. Now we just have to learn to use them, basically. But what we need, Simon, is that these different authorities start to work together and trying to help society to actually move or be mobile in a sustainable way. Meaning that sometimes we take the bike, sometimes we take the bus as a person. And when it is a question about goods, we also seek to find super solutions. And nobody yet is trying to get a grip on that one. So that's why, I mean, if we should, and we have to be even better, we need a new code of conduct or a new code of something, which we managed to make it in Denmark within buildings, as we agreed on the DGNB standard for sustainable buildings. But somehow we need to develop something which we could also export in Europe. What is sustainable mobility? How do you say that in English?
Mobility.
Oh, mobility. What is sustainable mobility? Yeah. And make it very attractive for all authorities and procurers, whatever, to actually do it or to get some incentives out of it, which we are not doing today at all. And we know we are going to produce a lot of roads and rails upcoming years, but how do they actually interact? We have a metro now in Copenhagen. No buses anymore go where they used to. We used to take just one bus from one end to Copenhagen to the next. That's not possible anymore, because now all the buses go to the next metro station. That's a bugger. That's so irritating, basically. So that in the end, you end up taking your car, if you can, or then you just stop visiting your old grandma in the other end of Copenhagen. So somehow we have to.
So there's
we
a
have to
lack
have
of
this,
collaboration.
we have to have this perspective of the user to make it attractive and important and easy.
But-
and I said this as a private person.
Okay,
Please.
no, but I think you are absolutely right that integrated transport systems are extremely important, and the only way for those to come about is through a very strong and genuine collaboration between those different organizations that cover up the different aspects of the transport system. I think there is a good example of that actually. I talked about two wheels and bicycles to begin with. And it's notoriously difficult to get people on a bicycle as soon as the distances gets a bit longer. But what we do see is where you can bring a bicycle on the train, which is something we've been actually good at, finding new ways of making that easier here, where we are in Denmark and Copenhagen. That actually makes a difference. So you take your bicycle, then you get on a train, then you use your bicycle again, and that type of flexibility. And I think we've seen some good examples of that. And I'm very convinced by your argument that maybe we need more of that still.
Well, I fully agree with you. And a couple of years ago, I was participating in a project. The name was Mobility as a Service.
Yeah.
And somehow it has been disappeared somewhere. But I do think it's the ideas behind that concept was actually quite interesting, and maybe we should look at it again.
But I think it's some of the things that you've actually raised quite early on in the debate, Russell, was exactly the service aspect in terms of the various interfaces. So I think I just want to let you comment on this at the very end here today.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things is that you need to provide a service that goes all the way from A to B. There's no point going 85% of the way there. So-called last mile solutions, how do we cater for those for people getting from the train or metro station or whatever else. How do we integrate that into the forecourts, into the station areas, etc., and also provide different solutions for people for that last mile. It's trying to look at as many different people's needs as possible, going out there, talking to the public, having public consultations, what would work, what's needed, how do we need to change things, ensuring we provide safe environments for people travelling at all hours of the day, and things like that. So really thinking about the diverse community we live and work in, and trying to cater for those as much as possible.
And I can just share on a closing note, anecdotally, a researcher from University of Copenhagen who conducted an experiment, because we talk a lot about mobility and the two wheels, etc. So she decided to bring her walker with her. So if you have a walker, gangstøtte på dansk, and try and get across Copenhagen with a walker, if you want to go from A to B using different means of transportation. And she was able to document, photographing what that actually meant. So sometimes life actually can throw us a curveball, so we're not as accessible or easily movable as we assume. So I just think that it is a very nice point to finish that there is room for improvement in terms of collaboration, but with the user in focus. We've come to the very end of today's debate. Tom, I want to say thank you so very much for participating and joining us from afar. I want to say thank you so very much to Simon, to Gert, to Russell, and absolutely a formidable thank you to you guys who've been with us today here in BLOXHUB, and to you who've been with us virtually. It has been such a pleasure. And it has been a debate focusing on not only the political, the design, aesthetics, materials, technology. We've really covered a lot of ground when it pertains to infrastructure. But I don't think I have heard LCA mentioned as frequently in the space of 60 minutes as I have today. And that brings me just to, as an appetizer, to say at our next science talks, we will get a researcher from DTU to present the latest research knowledge on LCA. When it comes to circular design and circular construction, LCA is often used, but I must say today, it was really brought to the table that we need to elongate the life cycle analysis. We need to incorporate how it is used to document the impact. And I think on that note, I wish you a very good day wherever you are. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you again at our next event. So thank you.